Think back to the smell of fresh ink on a Saturday morning when your pocket money was burning a hole in your hand as you dashed to the corner shop. You'd flick through the newsstand, that crisp comic paper crackling as you opened the pages, and suddenly the world outside didn't matter. For some, it was Dennis the Menace pulling another prank. For others, it was Dan Dare blasting off into space, or Roy of the Rovers scoring the winning goal in the dying minutes. These weren't just stories, they were your mates, your heroes, your escape. But many of those comics, once as regular as a cuppa, have vanished from our lives. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you might just rediscover the one that made your childhood magical. If there was ever a comic that defined British childhood, it was the Beano. First hitting shelves in 1938, it quickly became the cheeky heartbeat of playground culture, and while it still technically survives today, the classic Beano of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the one many of us grew up with, has vanished forever. Those yellowed pages brought us the wild mischief of Dennis the Menace, the relentless chaos of Minnie the Minx, and the slapstick lunacy of the Bash Street Kids. You can almost hear the crash and bang leaping off the panels, the kind of humor that had you laughing out loud, even if your mum shouted up the stairs to keep the noise down. The drawings were simple, the jokes outrageous, and that was the magic. But the Bino was more than paper and ink. It was a ritual, running to the newsagent on a Wednesday, clutching it all the way home, then swapping and trading strips with mates at school. It was rebellion in cartoon form, giving every kid the courage to laugh at authority, to be a little bit naughty, and to see life through mischievous eyes. The decline came quietly. Tastes changed, TV and video games took over, and the humor was softened for a new generation. While today's Bino still carries the name, the sharp-edged anarchy of its golden age has disappeared. The Dennis of your childhood, slingshot in hand, dog Gnasher by his side, belongs to another era. If you remember those classic issues, you don't just recall a comic. You remember the laughter, the mischief, the feeling that the world was yours to prank. And that version of the Bino, it may have vanished, but in memory, it's still as loud and cheeky as ever. Before there was the Bino, there was the Dandy. Launched in 1937, it wasn't just another comic. It was Britain's first big step into a world of cheeky characters and larger-than-life fun. For decades, the Dandy was the crown jewel of the newsstand, and for a time, it was the best-selling comic in the country. Its pages introduced us to unforgettable faces. Desperate Dan, with his square jaw and cow pie bigger than the dinner table. Corky the cat, who could make the simplest gag into a laugh-out-loud moment, and a host of others that felt like old friends. The artwork had a bold, colorful charm, and the jokes often carried that classic British humor, a mix of silliness, mischief, and just enough cheek to keep kids hooked. For many families, the Dandy wasn't just for kids. Parents remembered reading it themselves and passed it on to their children, making it a shared tradition. Saturday mornings meant the kitchen tables scattered with comics, laughter echoing as everyone pointed out their favorite strips. But as the decades rolled on, the world shifted. Television and later video games began stealing young eyes away from the printed page. Sales dwindled, and by the 2000s, it was struggling to keep up with the times. In December 2012, after 75 glorious years, the Dandy printed its final issue. An online version followed, but it couldn't recapture the magic of holding those paper pages in your hands. The end of the Dandy felt like more than the loss of a comic. It was the closing of a chapter in British childhood itself. If you grew up with Desperate Dan or Corky the cat, you know it wasn't just entertainment. It was laughter, comfort, and a little slice of joy in a simpler time. When Eagle first appeared in 1950, it wasn't just another comic. It was a revolution in print. Born out of a post-war Britain eager for optimism and imagination, Eagle promised something brighter, bolder, and more inspiring than anything that had come before. And at its heart was the legendary Dan Dare, the pilot of the future. The artwork was unlike anything kids had ever seen. Full-color spreads, sleek rocket ships, alien landscapes. It felt cinematic in an era when few homes even had televisions. You could almost hear the engines roar as Dan Dare blasted across the galaxy, battling Treens and facing off against the sinister Meekon with his bulging green head. For children of the 1950s and 60s, Eagle wasn't just escapism, it was a portal to the future, a vision of what Britain could dream and achieve. But Eagle also reflected the values of its time: bravery, ingenuity, and a sense of duty. In its pages, kids learned not just to dream of space, but to believe in ideals of courage and fairness. For many, reading Eagle meant sitting on the living room floor on a rainy afternoon. The pages spread wide, the smell of fresh print still clinging to the air. By the late 1960s, though, tastes were changing. Television had arrived in every living room, and American comics were flooding the shelves with superheroes of their own. Eagle folded in 1969, though it saw a revival in the 1980s, one that never quite lived up to its golden age. For those who grew up with Dan Dare, the disappearance of Eagle was like losing a friend. It wasn't just a comic, it was hope, adventure, and a glimpse of tomorrow, wrapped in glossy pages that made you believe the stars were within reach. If you were a kid in the 1950s through to the 70s, chances are you knew Tiger. Launched in 1954, this was the comic that wore its heart firmly on the football pitch. While other weeklies gave you jokes and adventures, Tiger gave you heroes in boots and kits, and none shone brighter than Roy of the Rovers. For generations, Roy Race was more than just a character. He was the golden boy of Melchester Rovers, pulling off impossible goals and last-minute winners that made every young reader's heart race. Kids would run out to the park after reading, pretending to be Roy, blasting the ball and shouting his name as if the whole stadium were roaring. The panels were simple, but the drama was electric. Cliffhangers that left you desperate for next week's installment. But Tiger wasn't only about football. It gave space to other sports heroes too, from speedway to athletics, reflecting the energy of post-war Britain when sporting dreams felt larger than life. It was the sort of comic you'd tuck under your arm on a Saturday morning, then swap stories with mates while kicking a battered ball around until the streetlights came on. By the 1980s, though, Tiger was running out of steam. Kids had more distractions, and the comic eventually merged with Eagle in 1985. Roy of the Rovers lived on in his own title for a while, but the pure, weekly magic of Tiger was gone. Still, if you grew up with it, you know it wasn't just about football. It was about dreaming big, chasing glory, and feeling like every kick of the ball mattered. And when Tiger disappeared, it felt like the final whistle had blown on a whole era of childhood imagination. Launched in 1962, Valiant was the comic that felt like pure Saturday adventure. While some comics focused on laughs and others on sport, Valiant was about grit, action, and stories that made young readers feel like heroes themselves. It quickly became one of Fleetway's flagship titles, and for many, it was the comic you looked forward to tearing open after a long week at school. Its pages were filled with memorable strips. Kelly's Eye, where young Tim Kelly wielded the mystical eye of Zoltek that made him invincible. The Steel Claw, about Lewis Crandall, the man who turned invisible when electricity surged through his mechanical hand, and Captain Hurricane, the oversized ex-Marine whose war stories were as wild as they were thrilling. These weren't just characters, they were legends you could lose yourself in, their adventures crackling with suspense and daring. What made Valiant so special was its ability to blend fantasy and reality. It tapped into Britain's wartime spirit, mixing tales of courage and determination with the fantastical. For a boy in the 60s or 70s, sprawled out on the carpet with a bag of crisps, reading Valiant felt like stepping into another world where you could be invincible, invisible, or unbreakable. But as with so many greats, the glory didn't last. By the mid-70s, sales were sliding, and in 1976, Valiant merged with Battle Picture Weekly. The characters lived on in bits and pieces, but the unique flavor of Valiant That perfect mix of mystery, courage, and excitement was gone. For those who remember it, Valiant wasn't just a comic. It was the thrill of turning a page, not knowing what would happen next. The rush of adventure packed into every panel, and when it disappeared, it felt like Britain had lost one of its boldest voices in print. When Whizzer and Chips hit the shelves in 1969, it came with a cheeky promise: 2 comics in 1. And for kids across Britain, that little twist made it feel like you were getting twice the fun for your precious pocket money. Inside the bright cover, there was the Whizzer half and the Chips half, each stuffed with its own stable of mischief makers. On the Whizzer side, you had favorites like Sid's snake, always up to some daft trick, and Shiner, forever finding trouble on and off the football pitch. Flip over to Chips, and you'd find Shrimpy, Mustafa Million, and a gang of equally daft faces. But the real magic was the rivalry. Were you a whiz kid or a chipite? That playground debate could get as heated as football loyalties. Kids would argue at break time, swap strips, and secretly spy on the other side, just as the comics characters teased each other across the divide. What made Whizzer and Chips special wasn't just the gags, though. It was the way it turned reading into an event, the smell of the ink, the feel of the thin paper, and the excitement of splitting it down the middle gave it a charm unlike any other. For many, Saturday mornings weren't complete without that double helping of laughs. By the 1980s, however, the formula was starting to wear thin. The comic merged with Whoopee in 1985, and later folded into Buster. Though some characters lived on, the unique 2-in-1 format that made Whizzer and Chips a playground favorite vanished. Still, if you were a whiz kid or a chipite, you remember the fun, the debates, and the sense that you were part of a secret club. And when it disappeared, it felt like the end of a rivalry that only kids could truly understand. If the 1970s and 80s had a comic that truly captured the spirit of TV culture, it was Lookin. First published in 1971, it proudly called itself the Junior TV Times. And that's exactly what it was, a glossy window into the world of pop stars, kids' shows, and Saturday night telly, all in one colorful package. Its pages were packed with TV tie-ins that made it irresistible. You could follow adventures from the $6 Million Man, Charlie's Angels, or Wurzel Gummidge, all illustrated in bold, vibrant strips. And it wasn't just about TV, it was about music too. Pop stars like ABBA, Madness, or Adam Ant would appear in interviews, posters, and pin-ups, making Lookin the must-have for every school bag. For many kids, buying Lookin on a Saturday morning felt like stepping into the same world you saw on the box in your living room. You'd pore over the lyrics section, try your hand at the puzzles, and then proudly tack the posters onto your bedroom wall, often to your parents' despair when the wallpaper disappeared under layers of tape and staples. The comic wasn't just entertainment, it was cultural glue. At school on Monday, everyone talked about the same strip, the same pop poster, the same silly joke tucked into the margins. It made you feel connected, part of a generation growing up on the same shows and songs. By the mid-80s, though, tastes had shifted. The novelty wore off. Glossy teen magazines and endless TV itself made Lookin feel less essential. It limped into the 90s before folding in 1994, leaving behind a treasure trove of memories. For those who remember it, Lookin wasn't just a comic. It was the sound of Saturday nights, the glow of the TV set, and the soundtrack of youth captured in print. Its disappearance felt like losing a scrapbook of your own childhood. For countless girls across Britain, Bunty wasn't just a comic, it was a companion. First published in 1958, it spoke directly to schoolgirls in a way few others did, offering stories of friendship, courage, and everyday adventures that felt close to home. For decades, Bunty was as much a part of girlhood as skipping ropes, plats, and secret diaries. The comic was famous for its picture stories, many of them touching and surprisingly heartfelt. Tales like The Four Marys, about 4 very different girls at boarding school, became beloved fixtures, while other strips explored themes of kindness, loyalty, and quiet bravery. Each week, readers found heroines they could admire, laugh with, or sometimes even cry for. And then there was the Bunty paper doll, tucked into the back pages. Every issue came with a cutout doll and new outfits to dress her in, from summer dresses to school uniforms, turning reading into a hands-on ritual. Many girls carefully cut them out, stored them in envelopes, and treasured them like tiny wardrobes. The magic of Bunty wasn't just in its stories, it was in the way it made young readers feel seen. While boys had Tiger or Valiant, girls could open Bunty and find characters who faced the same problems they did: friendship fallouts, unfair teachers, or simply wanting to do the right thing. For a rainy Sunday afternoon, Bunty was a whole world waiting in your lap. But by the 1990s, tastes were changing. Television, pop music magazines, and later the internet pulled young readers in other directions. In 2001, after more than 40 years, Bunty was quietly discontinued. Its disappearance wasn't just the end of a comic, it was the fading of a tradition. For those who grew up with it, Bunty wasn't just ink on paper, it was friendship, imagination, and the simple joy of a cutout doll with a brand new dress. If Bunty was about friendship and light-hearted adventures, Misty was her darker, mysterious cousin. First published in 1978, it was unlike any other girls' comic at the time. Its pages whispered of haunted houses, ghostly figures, and strange, unsettling happenings, all with a gothic flair that made it stand out instantly. Misty didn't shy away from the eerie. Its stories often carried a moral, wrapped in supernatural twists. A selfish girl might find herself cursed, a bully might meet a ghostly punishment, or an innocent heroine might stumble into a chilling otherworld. The tone was darker, the art more atmospheric, with shadowy panels and dramatic shading that gave every page an almost cinematic feel. It was a comic that made you read with the lights just a little brighter. For many young readers, Misty felt like a secret thrill, something you'd devour under the covers with a torch, heart racing at the final twist. It captured the growing appetite for horror and mystery in the late 70s, offering gothic tales that rivaled the ghost stories swapped at school or whispered at sleepovers. But what really made Misty iconic was its confidence. It didn't talk down to its readers. It respected their appetite for the strange and the unsettling, creating a space where young girls could explore themes of fear, justice, and morality in a safe but thrilling way. Sadly, Misty didn't last long. By 1980, it had merged into Tammy, its identity diluted until it eventually vanished from shelves altogether. But its impact lingered. Even today, collectors treasure old issues, and fans remember the shivers down their spines as they turned those shadowy pages. Misty wasn't just a comic. It was an atmosphere, a mood, a ghostly companion that showed young readers that stories could be both beautiful and terrifying. Its disappearance left a gap that no other comic quite managed to fill. Launched in 1971, Tammy was a comic that broke new ground for girls' storytelling. While titles like Bunty had focused on friendship and light-hearted adventures, Tammy dug deeper, offering grittier tales of hardship, sacrifice, and emotional struggle. For many young readers, it was the first time a comic made them cry, and they loved it all the more for it. Strips like Slaves of War Orphan Farm or Bella at the Bar didn't shy away from struggle. Characters were often working-class girls facing cruelty, unfairness, or personal battles, yet finding resilience and strength along the way. This wasn't fantasy escapism. It was gritty drama with a beating heart. Stories that made readers feel they weren't alone in their own challenges. The emotional pull of Tammy was powerful. Girls would huddle over the latest issue, turning pages with a lump in their throat, fully invested in whether Bella would triumph in gymnastics or whether a downtrodden heroine would finally find justice. Teachers and parents sometimes raised eyebrows at the darkness of the tales, but for the readers, it was honest, raw, and relatable. For many, Tammy was more than just entertainment, it was validation. It showed that comics could tell stories about real feelings, real struggles, and still inspire hope. It gave working-class girls in particular heroines who looked a little more like them and lived lives that weren't all sunshine and roses. By the mid-80s, though, the comic landscape was shifting. In 1984, Tammy merged with Bunty and later folded into Misty before vanishing altogether. The disappearance of Tammy felt like the loss of one of the boldest, bravest voices in British comics. For those who remember it, Tammy wasn't just ink and paper. It was emotion, resilience, and the thrill of stories that dared to dig deeper. And when it was gone, it left a silence that no other comic quite managed to replace. When we look back at these vanished comics, it isn't just about the strips or the characters on the page, it's about the moments they created. Saturday mornings at the newsagent, afternoons sprawled on the carpet with a comic spread wide. The laughter, the tears, the sense that those stories were written just for you. These comics weren't just entertainment, they were companions, shaping childhoods, friendships, and imaginations across Britain. And though they've disappeared from the shelves, they still live on in memory, tucked away like treasured keepsakes. If any of these names stirred something in you, if you smiled at a memory or felt a pang of nostalgia, then you're not alone. Share the one you remember most in the comments, and let's keep those memories alive together. And if you want more journeys back into the heart of Britain's past, don't forget to subscribe. This is where we keep the stories, the laughs, and the simple joys alive.